And I'm going to turn the time over to Koji. Thanks for joining us, Koji.
Thank you, Christian. So, yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. Thanks everyone for joining me today. I hope to be fairly quick on the presentation so we have time to chat. So today I'm going to talk about designing for the next billion. But before, I just want to talk a little bit about me. I was born in Brazil in a city called Belo Horizonte. I was fortunate enough to be the first in my family to go to college and get a degree. I studied in Brazil, back in Brazil, earned my master's there. So unlike a lot of my friends here, didn't go to Stanford and MIT. Um, and a little bit about me, a little bit more. I owned a startup in a studio when I was 21 years old. That was very scary, especially in Brazil to do. At some point, we're working in this product where we had a server. There was a website. People will go to this website, order a pizza. The server will send a facsimile to a pizza place. They will get the order in paper in a fax, deliver the pizza, and get the money in cash. So that was my first exposure to product. That was back in 2000s. I joined Google about 10 years ago to work on Orkut. That was the first social network that Google built. I left and I rejoined after a year. So since then, I've been here for 8 years. And I lead today a UX team here on a team called NBU, which means Next Billion Users. So doing a lot of interesting trips to India, Brazil, US to do research, and also very excited about design sprints. Plus, I was also a teacher in Brazil, so I taught interaction design prototyping in the first interaction design program in Brazil. I went to Barcelona about like a month and a half ago to also be a guest teacher there. So definitely education is very important for me. So yeah, a little bit about the products that I worked on. As I mentioned, Orkut, the first one, but I also worked in a couple of other ones, including Google News, Google Plus, a bunch of crazy startup-like experiments like Who's Down, Sparks, and Spaces that went to the Play Store for about a year, and then we took off. But I learned a lot with those failures. And now I'm building a product for the next billion users. We launched this product in 2017 as an experiment in the beginning. Right now we have actually I have to update the slide, we crossed 80 million monthly active users per month. And we have a very good star rating on Play Store, which we're very proud of, especially for the design team who worked very hard to make this product. But basically what the product does is three things. It helps you to free up space, helps you to browse your files and share your files. And the interesting thing and what I want to talk today is about the journey to get to this product. When we started to do the research, one of the things that we wanted to be clear on is that we want to have a very clear problem before even we start to work on the product. So we had this hunch that one third of users, that some people in India was running out of space. And but we didn't know that from the beginning. Like one third of population means more than 1 billion of people in India. So it took a lot for us to actually get back and learn that first that was a big problem to solve, right? Like it's a big pain to not have free space in your phone, because basically if your phone doesn't have space, you can download a movie, you can't play a song, you can't install a new app. There's basically nothing you can do with your phone. And one third of population, it is big enough for the type of problem that Google is looking for. And of course, like before that and during that process, we went to a lot of ups and downs. So when I joined the team, we're testing this completely different direction where we went to India. we tested with a group of users, and after a week, nobody was actually open the app. So that was very kind of like frustrating time for us as a team. And then like slowly we progressed. We did a lot of more research, and after after the failure of doing the first tester in India, we came back. We run a couple of design sprints where we come up with different prototypes. Then we test it again. Fortunately, one of those prototypes end up being what the product is today, like very close to the direction we have today, and that gives us more hope and excitement. And pretty much the 6 more months that we needed to shift the boat and really come up with this new direction. So this is a little bit of the trusted testers. I have some pictures, but basically we had like a fake launch. We went there, we had the whole thing where we tested with a logo, we had like a name for the app. We let people test it for a week. We installed the app in their phones, and we let them play with the app for about a week. And after a week, nobody was really using it. So the interesting thing is that when we came back, we started to work on this new direction, and a little before the official launch, we have a leak. And the leak was not, in this case at least, was not planned at all. Like, it was an actual leak. Someone just published the build in the wrong place. And the curious things about this is that I was very frustrated. I was very afraid of the leak because the design was really, really bad at that time. But lucky enough, I don't know, for some crazy reason, all the feedback from the media was very positive, and that gives actually more free media and free exposure to the app even before we launch, which was great. So I guess like what I'm trying to say is that we've been through a lot of ups and downs, as many startups will do. Even inside Google, people usually think, oh yeah, if I join Google, my life will be 100% stable. Well, it depends. It depends on the team. It depends on what you want to do. And I choose to work in these things that are more like early stage, which is great. Like, it's a lot of ownership, but also it can be very difficult in like emotional side of it. But the interesting thing is that once you reach maturity and scale, there's a lot of things that you can learn and share with other teams, because every single journey to build a new product will be different in a certain way. And ours specifically was very unique because we started from the ground up, not from the innovation technology side, which is very common for Google, but mostly from the human-centric side. I do have a video here that I want to play very quickly. Let's see if you guys can hear it.
ನಿಜ ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಂಗೆ ಆಕ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ತುಂಬಾ ಹುಚ್ಚು. ನಾನು ಆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಮೂವೀಸ್ ನ ಶೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ ಶೇರ್ ಮಾಡೋಕೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಖುಷಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಮನ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೀನಿ, ತುಂಬಾ ಹೀರೋ ತರ ಫೀಲಿಂಗ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ನನ್ಗೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಸ್ಟೋರೇಜ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಫೋನಲ್ಲಿ, ಜರಿ 16 GB ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಸ್ಟೋರೇಜ್. ನಾನು ಫೋನ್ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಸ್ಟೋರೇಜ್ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಡಿಲೀಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ಮೂವೀಸ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಬೇರೆ.
ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ NGOದಲ್ಲಿ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಸೊ ನನಗೆ ಒಂದ್ ದಿವಸಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ಲೆಂಟೀಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಮೇಲ್ಸ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಪ್ಲೆಂಟೀಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಪಿಕ್ಚರ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಇಮೇಲ್ಸ್ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ತಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಸೊ ನನಗೆ KBs ಅಂಡ್ ಮೆಮೊರೀಸ್ ಯಾವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಫುಲ್ ಆಗ್ತಾನೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಇದೆ ನನ್ನ ಮಗಳು ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕಲ್ ಡ್ಯಾನ್ಸರ್, ಮತ್ತೆ ಮ್ಯೂಸಿಕ್ ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತಾಳೆ. ಅವಳದು ಫೋಟೋಸು ಎಲ್ಲ ತುಂಬಾ ತಗೊಂತಾ ಇರ್ತೀನಿ, ನಾನು ವಿಡಿಯೋಸು ಎಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ತುಂಬಾ ಫುಲ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ತುಂಬಾ ಸಲ ನನ್ಗೆ ಅನ್ಸಿದೆ ಫೋನ್ ಮೆಮೊರಿ ಅದೇ ತೋರ್ಸುತ್ತೆ, ಮೆಮೊರಿ ಫುಲ್. ತುಂಬಾನೇ ಈಸಿ ಅನ್ಸಿದೆ ನನ್ಗೆ ಈ ಆಪ್ ಫೈಲ್ಸ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡೋದ್ರಿಂದ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ತೋರ್ಸುತ್ತೆ ಯಾವ ಆಪ್ ನಾವ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ KB ಅಂಡ್ MB ಇದಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ನಂಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಕೊಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾವ ವಿಡಿಯೋಸ್ ಬೇಕೋ ಬೇಡವೋ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಜಂಕ್ ಫೈಲ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ತೋರ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ಅದ್ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ನಾವ್ ಇಟ್ಕೊಬಹುದು, ಬೇಡ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಡಿಲೀಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬಹುದು.
ಫೈಲ್ಸ್ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈ 2 ಆಪ್ ಕೆಲಸನ ಒಂದೇ ಆಪ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ 2 ಆಪ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾವ್ದು ಹೇಳಿ, ಇವಾಗ ಫೈಲ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಶೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಆಪ್ಸ್, ಮತ್ತೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಫೈಲ್ಸ್ ನೋಡ್ಬೋದು. ಫೈಲ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಾರ್ಟೆಡ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕ್ಲೀನ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ.
ಫೈಲ್ಸ್ ಗೋ ಆಪ್ ಬಂದು ಲೈಕ್ ಲೆಟ್ಸ್ ಗೋ ಆಪ್ ತರ.
So this is more like a marketing video, but I want to show to you because these are actual users, and we captured some of these interviews during our research in India, one of the research trips we did in India. And it is very difficult for us sometimes to like relate to those specific use cases. But one of the things that I found very useful is to kind of like build more on the people side, like showing videos of real users, or even like taking people from my team to the field. It really changed the way that they perceived users, because it is a totally different thing from seeing like a research report or seeing someone presenting research versus like really seeing who the users are, how their daily life is, and having more contextual outlook on that. So I want to talk about why NBU and why NBU is important. So there is basically 1 billion of people that are becoming online, and all those billion of people are not like us. They are not like the kind of like US or Europe citizen. They it's kind of cutting my presentation with the thumbnails. Let's see if I can reduce. Yeah. So their first experience are on mobile phones and not desktop. So that's the first thing. Like if you think about us here, like, or if a person here who have the first experience with technology, probably the first experience will be either in a tablet or a desktop. And in their case, it is a mobile phone. People who never have contact with technology, even in their like 30s, for instance, they still have their first experience on a mobile phone. Most of them are in low-end devices, meaning that they have very limited storage. The phone is very slow. The OS can be very old, and they are under a very slow and pricey connection with very rare Wi-Fi access. So overall, like, we're talking about a totally different type of users. And again, this is more than 1 billion right now. So one thing that I like to say, first of all, is never assume that users are like you. And I think this is like initially for NBU, but you can pretty much apply this for everything. It's very difficult to work into something where people be a clone as you, right? Like people might have different behaviors, and some of those behaviors might drive them to very different profiles, right? In our case, when we're talking about NBU users, most of users are, for instance, on prepaid plans where they just get like credits where they can use a certain amount of data per month. Most of those users are not iPhone users or not even Pixel users, right? Like if we think about, how much an iPhone can cost, it's much more than even like a high-end phone or like Pixel phone, for instance, while like all the low-end phones like less than $300 are actually the biggest chunk of the market right now. So this group of users are definitely not like most of users that at least like I live with here in US. And then if you think about, again, the platforms, most of users are on smartphones, but a lot of them have never had any contact with personal computers or have never had like daily contact with personal computers, meaning that all the metaphors that we think about like desktop or icons might be totally different from them if they don't have those past learnings from different metaphors on desktop computing. So, any uh, any ideas about when this phone was launched? I don't know if you guys can say something, but I'll be willing to hear if you can.
Yeah, you can unmute yourselves if you want.
Any thoughts?
2010.
2010,
2013.
13.
I see the 4G. So.
Good catch. So this phone was launched in 2000. Whoa, I'm missing the slide. 2017. So this is JioPhone. JioPhone is the one of the most sold phones right now in India. They sold over 40 million devices, and the cost of these phones are around $18, right? Like we were talking about the past slides where phones were like under 300. This is like $18. And those 3 digits matters a lot for a lot of people across the world, and definitely like why they're selling this $100 million at the 100 million devices. It's definitely because they're able to make this cheap of a phone. And then you ask like, whoa, why keyboard? Like there are 2 reasons for that. I would say like one, my hunch is that people are, from the research we did, people are very afraid to work with or use smartphones because they're afraid to break their screens. So these phones, they feel tougher, they feel like more solid. So people feel more comfortable using this type of phones. And then reason number 2, when you remove the touch screen, you can cut the cost by almost like 60%. Because touchscreen is still one of the most expensive pieces of a smartphone. So design for inclusion is actually designing for everyone. And again, if you look at the past slides where I talked about the scale, like there's 1 billion of people who never got online, and that's not a number to ignore. That's a lot of people. So a few lessons. And I'll try to be quick here, but these are the principles that we came up with our team here. There are 6 things that are very important to keep in mind. Think slow, cost matters. We talked about cost here. Small first, provide visual cues, community is strong, and environment and culture. So first, think slow. Basically, as I said, internet can be very slow, connection can be very slow, and doesn't matter how slow it is, you can still optimize for speed. So for instance, if you haven't tried WhatsApp on, I don't know, like India or Brazil or whatever, you have very bad connection, even if you're in a flight, you know that WhatsApp allows you to queue messages and leave them there, and once you hit a good connection again, the messages will automatically be sent, right? So this is a very smart way to think about flaky and slow connections. As an example, 53% of users have done sites that takes more than 3 seconds to load. 1.6% of the Indian population have fixed line internet. So if we think about here in US, it's almost like, electricity. Like for us, it's you just take it for granted. But for a lot of people in India, it's something that they don't have by default. So designing for intermittent connection and slow connection, it's definitely like something that we take very seriously. So this is one example where we have on Chrome an option to download the page later. So that what that does basically is to kill that specific website that you try to access and you're offline. And once you reach again the internet connection, you get a notification that says like your page is now accessible and you can open that page. Cost matters. So basically, there's a lot of things to consider when we think about cost. If you think about pure cost, the cost of 1 gigabyte in US is around like $10. Average hourly wage is 26. And then what is important for you is to think, what is the amount of time I need to work to actually pay for that 1 gigabyte, which is in this case 23 minutes. If you think about Indonesia and you see the absolute number, then yes, it's cheaper. It's $2 or almost $3. But then the hourly wage is less than $1, meaning that you have to work for a few hours to actually have 1 hour or 1 gigabyte of access, right? So that's the type of thing that you have to shift a little bit when you think about cost. And 95% of Indian market, for instance, use prepaid data. So meaning that for them, data, it's a very limited and expensive resource. So one of the things that we try to do is, this is our app again, Files, design a very clear, large and far apart affordances to prevent mistake taps caused by broken screens and high contrast environments. And then this type of things, for instance, will avoid users to actually reduce data consumption and avoid users to, make mistakes. And, for us here, it doesn't mean anything. For them means that they will spend money downloading the next page, for instance. Small first. It is very important to think that 50% of the smartphones in India are under $100. And that means that, for instance, being able to provide control and transparency over data consumption, it's always very important. So for us, like, this is YouTube Go, and one of the things that we keep it very clear is even before you take an action, we communicate to the user how much of data will be taken if you, for instance, make a video offline. And being able to think about visual cues, because again, if you think about India, there's hundreds of different languages, maybe not hundreds, but tens of different languages, and it is very important that I also think that a lot of these countries, like Brazil, for instance, we have still a good rate of low literacy, and especially thinking about literacy from the spectrum of language, but also from the tech point of view. So some people will be able to read, but not necessarily read technical terms. So what we do in our case is making sure that we provide visual and visual cues that combine with text. So for instance, when we're working with material design to update the material design guidelines, and if you're designing for those markets, what we suggest is that you always pair text sections with visual icons. So like, even if you can't read 100% understand this, visual cue will also help you to understand the actions. And of course, like in this case, also we have this animation where files are being cut in half to be super clear. If you do the action here, you're going to destroy your files and there's no way back. So being very visual in that sense. So community is very important for those markets. If you think about India, there is a whole thing where people actually get a lot of referrals through mouth to mouth, and people care a lot about social connections. When they think about tech, they ask for help. They go to shopkeepers to ask for help. So thinking about social as a currency is a very important thing to do when you think about UX for those markets. So what we do in our case is encourage sharing of experiences, design for individual and community, and allow people to show off to friends and family if if they're doing like a social action. In this case, I have a small quick video here where we're showing off our sharing, the offline sharing feature. You can see people nearby and you can share files as you would share on AirDrop, for instance. But there's a whole social aspect where we consider the fact that people want to be recognized by the amount of files they share. So if you share more files, then you have like that shown in your profile that you're like a super shared or something like that. Environment and culture, I think that's the last but not the least thing to think about, is that specific cultures will have different aesthetics preferences, and it is very easy to kind of like say our aesthetics are better, the clean thing, but honestly, like there's no good or worse here. It's more about culture, and being able to be sensitive and understand all these differences are really a key if you want to be an international designer, I would say. So in our case, what we've been doing is trying to also include the designers from different regions to come up, for instance, for stickers for our Messenger app, where instead of like having a designer here coming up with illustrations, we hire specific local illustrators to build those stickers for us. Okay, I think that's it. I had a couple of more slides, but I'll have to skip here because of the time, but I'll be happy to answer any questions and hear feedback from you guys.
Thank you, Koji. That was awesome. It's great to get that perspective for us. So we have a few folks who've asked questions in the Brown Bag channel. Let me just ask those at this point. First question is from Denise. How do you maintain a cohesive design while personalizing and addressing different cultural norms?
Can you repeat again? I'm just...
Yeah. How do you maintain a cohesive design while also personalizing and addressing different cultural norms?
I think cohesive, it's easier because we definitely build our own design system for NBU. In terms of personalized, I'm not sure if that means like stylistic design, like if you want to have like a more personal style on the design. But honestly, I think when you think about products, it's a little different than, for instance, graphic design. So graphic design, and I think like a lot of us come from, graphic design historically. Graphic design is usually a space where I used to do, for instance, like band posters and covers for albums. For that type of work, you can definitely have your very strong signature. And we have all this like very artistic designers in the past, like David Carson and all of that, where they have like a very big studio and people around them. Product design, it's a little different. It's more about like, how do you understand users and how do you transform those insights into something that people actually want to use, right? So in some sense, it's less exciting because it's less about authorship. And the other sense is very interesting because it's more about the users than you. So that's the way that I think about this.
Awesome, thanks. What common mistakes do new UX designers do or face as they're entering the field? That's from Alexander.
Mm-hmm. I think one common mistake is I think like as product designers, you have to be very focused on what you want to do. And you have to be very focused on understanding what are the trade-offs and what are the, things that are like part of the job. And one of the things is being able to work with different mental models with people who are very different than you. For instance, engineers. Engineers come from a point of view where they're very like methodical, very like focus on numbers and data, and designers sometimes have very hard time working with those specific type of people. So you can never be a really successful designer if you don't build a good relationship with engineers, because they are part of the product team. So I think that's something that I see very frequently, is young designers having a very hard time empathizing with engineers. So it's a soft skill if you can think about it, but also like very, very central soft skill, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you. That's something that we emphasize here at Lambda, is trying to develop that type of empathy and understanding. Cool. So we have another question from Denise. Do you see young children using mobile? At what ages do you see children starting to use mobile phones and more complex interactions beyond texting? Any information there?
Okay. I can't actually give a good answer here, because at Google we do have a specific team who are looking at that demographic. I never worked with that team, and I don't have enough information to give it back to you.
No worries. From Chi, as a UX lead for a prominent company, is there anything specific that you look for in a UX design portfolio? Any suggestions or tips on creating a solid portfolio?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can share a link where I had an interview about portfolios, and I can share with you, Christian, and maybe you can send to them. But
Yeah,
basically, absolutely. I think there's two things that I look for. One, if I'm hiring at Google, and I do hire at Google, I look at two things. Like, one, what's your experience? Have you worked in an environment where you're able to design a product? Designing a product means that you have to work with engineers, you have to work with PMs, and you have to go through the whole process, not just like visioning. Like, you have to actually launch something, and you know, something that have users, which is important. So that's number one. Then number two, we look for people who are easy to work with and can navigate and sympathize and empathize with different types of people. So that soft skill is like top of the mind for us. And in portfolio per se, another thing that I personally look for is if there is like product work that feels a little bit novel in some sense, not novel from, you know, micro interaction or any like specific design work, but like, is there anything that this product feels like was unique in some sense? Maybe the team that you worked with, or maybe the process of research that you did. So being able to come up with a portfolio that shows the whole process, it is very important, because then I can, you know, look for these hints.
Great. Appreciate that answer. Alexander asks, when designing for low-cost smartphones, is it better to have your design simple?
I think, to me, simplicity, there's this book like Laws of Simplicity, which I really like. And I think simplicity, it is definitely a very common question around design. I have mixed feelings. I think like simplicity should not come in an expense of not meeting the user needs, or not like, or like making the whole user experience harder to, you know, hard to use. So for instance, the Design of Everyday Things, another book that Donald Norman think about doors, he mentioned a lot about designs that are very simple but very hard to use, because you just remove everything. You remove affordances, you remove visual cues, and then all of a sudden you just it just becomes this like white block, right? But at the same time, I do believe that simplicity has some advantages. So for instance, of course, like if you have a screen that has 20 things you can do, there's really nothing you can do, right? Like there's too many things happening. So I think there is always this tension between simplicity and easiness of use. And honestly, I don't think there is any recipe for that. It's really something that you build over time, plus a lot of research that will help you to build that specific muscle.
Great. Olu asks, considering the cost of data plans in developing countries, and as someone who also grew in one, what are the considerations in designing products that optimize speed but use low data plan for those regions? And also a question about the engineering constraints that need to be considered for those regions. Is there anything you can talk about there?
Yeah, I think it's a very general question. Maybe I can give like few ideas here, but I think one is research. Like research is top of the mind. Like you cannot empathize with any users that are slightly different from you if you don't do a lot of research. Even if the user technically it is similar to you, you shouldn't skip research at all, because you're gonna for sure learn a lot of things, and people are not copies, identical copies. So again, I would tap on that button forever, like do research. And then the second thing about technology per se, yes, there is some trade-offs that you need to do when you're designing and you're thinking about like small screens and, for instance, resolution is one, how big the top targets are and how big the fonts could be. It's one call that you need to do. Oops. And other things are around like, should you have more animations or should you have less animations? And there are specific things you can do, like tricks where maybe you do have animations, but when you're doing animations, then nothing else happens, right? Because if you have a process in the background, then the animation will slow down. So there's few techniques that you can do from the implementation side too, to just like free up the processing to do just one thing per time.
Great. Caesar asks, what is something that you see or use in design that you don't see anybody else use, if there's something?
Can you say again?
Yep. He asks, what is something that you see or use in design that you don't see anybody else use?
Okay. I don't know, feels pretentious. I don't think I don't have anything in mind right now. Like I definitely feel that people are different, and I don't do much of design work myself anymore. I'm more like a manager lead at the moment. But I definitely think there's a couple of special things about the team I am right now. One of them being very focused on problems first, users first, and then building products. I think that's definitely something I'm very proud of on this team. But I don't know. I guess like a lot of teams might also do that. But at least for me, it was something that made me very excited about this team.
Awesome. Mira asks if there are any books or articles that have played a pivotal role in your UX career.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, there is, I think, early stages of my career, the design of everyday things, it's basically like a Bible for a lot of designers and for me. That's one. Another one is Laws of Simplicity that I mentioned. There is this book called Hooked Model, which is more on the product side that I really liked and read a couple of times, and Lean Startup. in Design Sprints, which is a book that came from Jake Knapp, who was a Googler. And yeah, I think those are pretty much the main books. I think the two books about product management / design, product design, that I like the most are Hooked and Lean Startup. Those are very eye-opening for me, because when you're designing products, you're not designing the surface. You're not designing the pixels. You're not designing, how the product looks like. You're designing the experience, and you also have to think about the value proposition. How does that product fits in someone's life? Like, is this something that you want to use? Like, does this make you want to use it? And if designers are just thinking about pixels, it's going to be very hard to make ourselves important in the team, right? Like, we have to design not for the pixels. We have to design for the people, ultimately.
Absolutely. Kimberly asks, when conducting user testing for a demographic that may not have access to Wi-Fi, how would you reach out to that audience since you're located in the US? I'm thinking of how you have to record interactions and interviewing.
Right. In our case, we're fortunately enough to have a research team at Google. So in my case, we have 2 researchers, that are actually 3 now. They are based in India. For us, it's easier to have them there because they can conduct research very quickly. But in other teams, sometimes we'll have people here and we'll travel to specific countries if that's the case. With that said, usually the way we do home visits, or we basically do 2 things, I would say, like the biggest chunks. One are home visits, where we go to a specific place where the person lives or the family lives. We have a quick conversation, not a quick, but like sometimes an hour, 30 minutes conversation with them. Sometimes individually, sometimes will be more like a focus group. And we record, we ask for permission to record the audio and the video. We just use it internally. We take notes. So that's one way. Another way is just doing intercepts, which is like a quick and cheap way to do research. We basically go to, let's say, last time we went to Detroit, and we just we were in like a specific part of Detroit where a lot of people were taking buses to the other cities, and we just stand there in the bus stop, and we started to ask people if they had a minute to talk with us. And we just presented the question and asked a few questions. Sometimes we'll present a prototype or a paper prototype and ask a few questions.
Great insights. Sean asks if there's anything that students can do to get to the point of creating products that have users versus just student projects. Any suggestions?
That's the hardest thing, to be honest, because of course, like, if Google wants someone to be hired that has experience with product, like where do you get the experience in product, right? Like, I think that's a big question. So far, my guidance is try to extract opportunities from smaller places first before you try Google. So for instance, you can either you can do, okay, let's start with the easiest one, concepts. You can do concepts in school. You can share concept on Behance, right? Next step, maybe you get a volunteer work and you can work with, I don't know, doctors, Doctors Without Frontiers, or some NGO. And then the second step will be finding a startup that maybe needs help but doesn't have a lot of money. And maybe you can like do freelance work or something like that. And then you start to scale up, like getting to a bigger startup. To get to Google, I think like either you have a very, very outstanding background on the academic side, or then you worked in a startup before. it is very hard to just get it right away from here. In my case, it was very hard too. Like I got through my startup experience before joining Google.
Graham asks, how closely do you work with the research team when designing for international markets?
The research team is part of the UX team. So UX includes like design, research, motion design, visual design, UX writer we have in our team too, and UX BGM. So we have frequent meetings. We have like weekly meetings. We have design critiques. We also have, in my case, because I'm the lead, I have one-on-one with everyone in my team. So what I try to do is like make sure that everyone is aligned. We're driving towards the same direction, and the researchers are part of the UX team. So even if we're just exploring a few ideas, they will be in the meeting and they might suggest, hey, actually, I think we should test this, or or maybe the other way around. Like someone presented something and asked, like, hey, should we test this? So I think it's a better way to kind of make the team one unique team rather than just separate silos.
Great. Sean asks, what sites or tools do you check or use frequently to stay on top of your game? Are there any?
Yes. I like to follow Medium. I think that's the biggest like source of information for me right now. I follow just like company design teams. So for instance, Facebook has one, Google has one design team there. I've also published a few articles there. There is, I don't know, Airbnb, Uber also have one. So then I can learn like what those guys are working on, and what are the differences between the approach to UX. And then books, I try to like follow up and see where the most interesting ones that I could read at the moment. So the one that I'm reading now is Radical Candor, which is about management. And let's see what else. Twitter, I also follow a couple of people on Twitter. I won't remember specific names right now, but definitely like Luke W, which I worked with before. It's some of the people that I follow. There is also this Medium group called, I think it's UX, the Paulo Bear UX design group on Medium, which is also from two Brazilian friends that live, I think one live in New York right now, Fabricio and Caio. This is also a nice publication on Medium. And I think that's it pretty much. And just like tech blogs in general. Yeah.
Awesome. So we have just about 4 minutes left. We've got a couple more questions, so I'm going to try to get these ones done. Miki's asks, for case studies and portfolio projects, is there any particular format that you would look for? Any particular details that should be included about each project? The order of those details, how many projects, etc. Any feedback to share there?
I think in general, my suggestion is to dig deep into the details of the process and worry less about the final outcomes. And it's okay to commit mistakes. It's okay to, commit mistakes and learn. So that those kind of things are actually very interesting. If you have like a case where you tested something, it didn't work, and then you change direction, that shows that you work with research very well. You take that very seriously and you change your direction, rather than just like presenting one design which is very well fleshed out or has a very Google kind of like dribble animation on it, but then like how do you get there, right? I mean, that's what we want from a designer that wants to work on product. Like Like, how do you get to a specific outcome? If it's just a concept, then that's good, but then, it doesn't prove much.
Awesome. And then one last question we'll ask right now is, for someone who has led and deployed a product in the past prior to gaining UX design education, what are such person's chances with such case studies to be considered for an interview with Google, for example? Any thoughts?
I think it's a little vague, like what's the experience in that case? Can we elaborate
So
more?
this is someone who's worked in product management, I guess you could say, and then has sort of switched over to UX design, and maybe speak to that.
Yeah, because I think it really depends on, like, where your experience was, how your experience was, because there is no way to I can't answer that question without having that kind of detail. But I think there's no blockers for sure.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks so much, Koji. We really appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today, and we'd love to keep the relationship going. But is there any final words you want to share with us before we part ways?
No, I think it's just very grateful to be able to share my experience and have your attention for a few minutes. So thank you so much. I'm happy to, on some level, keep the connection with you guys and follow up later. So yeah.
Awesome. Is there a place that people can follow you or find out more what's going on?
I'm mostly active on Medium and Twitter. So both of my accounts are Koji EUMESMO. But I can send you the link too, because it's Portuguese, so I don't know if you can catch that now.
Yeah, if you wanted to share that, and if you wanted to share that other interview that you talked about earlier, then I'll pass it along to everybody.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye.